Hey everyone, it's Joe Glines here, back with GeekDude. We were starting this, and then my computer crashed hardcore. So anyway, we're starting again, and I was explaining to GeekDude, when I do web scraping, a lot of times with IE, I'll get stuck on trying to click a button or put in text, and it doesn't register. Often it's an event listener, and so I had asked him, how would we handle this in Chrome? And so we had a little pre-session here working through some of the stuff. So why don't you go ahead, Geek Dude, and take over?
Yeah. So Joe showed me a specific example of a website that he's had trouble with doing this kind of thing in the past. This is the Hi-Fi regex tester, designed for letting you test regular expressions. And you'll see if I start typing here, it will automatically highlight what in this text box was matched by the regular expression. And you won't need to know regular expressions to follow along here. The important part is that as you're typing in this box, the page is dynamically changing. And the way it does that is through these tools called event listeners. If you look in the Chrome developer tools and click on any element, you can go to the event listeners tab in the pane here on the right and see what listeners that the page's JavaScript has for that element. You can see here that this input box has elements for change. That's where the content has changed and you've clicked out, defocused it somehow. Key up, which registers after you press a key. It's the last event that the page gets. It has mouse up here for if you have clicked, when you release it, if you're over that element, it'll fire mouse up. And so any of these events, at least on this page, cause it to do that dynamic change. And when you're typing normally, you press a key, it gets key up. Maybe you were dragging and dropping text, that would get mouse up. But those kinds of events don't fire when you change the input box's value through Chrome.AHK, through JavaScript, through IE. And so what we're going to look at is how to cause those event handlers to run manually. So let's start by grabbing that page instance. And let's run just a little alert box to make sure we've got the right one. And it appears I have not gotten the right one. No, I've spelled evaluate wrong. Well, there we go. So we've got our page connection here loaded up. And what we want to do first is set the contents of this text box. You've seen this in previous videos, but let's go ahead and go through the steps again. Once you've inspected that element, you'll want to go to copy JS path, and this will put in your clipboard a little bit of JavaScript code that can be used to target that element. And you can see here the double quotes kind of conflict with the double quotes in AutoHotkey. So we're going to break that out into a variable definition so that when you use double quotes, it doesn't get upset with you. However, we also have to be careful now of percent signs, because when you have a quoted string, percents are literal, but when you have a plain text assignment here, quotes are literal and percent signs are variable references. So keep that in mind. So we're going to evaluate that, and our code is going to take that element that it found and set the value just to a dot. Normally, this would cause all of this text here to highlight yellow. But you can see the dots up here, and it still shows red, no matches found, and it's not yellow down there. But as soon as I click in it, this turns green, and this turns yellow. So we're going to try to send a click event and see where that gets us. And I'm moving this bit of JavaScript code down into a continuation section. This is one of AutoHotkey's features that lets you put multiple lines of text into a variable. And what this is going to let us do is run code the same way we would as if we had some code in the console and we pressed Shift-Enter to get a new line of code, and it'll run both of them together. You could call page.evaluate multiple times and it would work fine, but it's a little bit slower to do it that way. So it's better to group them together like this when you can. So after we set the value, let's copy and paste that selector again. We're going to, first off, try just .click. If you have a button on the page, and we've shown in previous examples using .click, this will invoke the button's action. Here I'm trying to use it to invoke the behavior from where I clicked on this and suddenly it turned green and yellow. But you'll see if we run this, it doesn't do it. I'm honestly not sure why, because you would think this would work, but it doesn't, and it's actually a little more complicated. Instead of clicking the clicking the element, you have to create and send a click event, and that's done using the dispatch event function here. So .dispatch event, and this takes a parameter. In this case, we're going to make it a new mouse event of type mouse up. And you'll see that this word mouse up matches exactly with the text over here in the event listeners tab. And that's important. You can send just a mouse event with really anything in that text box, but unless if that, anything in that quoted string, but unless if that matches exactly, it's not going to fire the event. Let's clear this out again and run. And you can see now immediately after the dot goes in there, we get that yellow text, we get that green box. But the mouse event isn't the only event handler that'll do that. We've also got these keyboard events like key up. And so we can, let's just change this. Instead of sending a mouse event, you can send a keyboard event. Let's set that to key up. And like with the mouse event, this quoted part has to match exactly with the event listener text there.
Hey, real quickly here, you knew to type keyboard event and to the left of it. I get how you got the word key up, but how did you know exactly to type I forget, was the mouse event or keyboard event? Was that actually listed somewhere on the page where you could see that?
That's not listed anywhere on the page. You can find that keyboard event, mouse event, and other event types by searching. Searching in the Mozilla docs are pretty good at documenting that kind of thing. I think W3 schools may have a primer on it. I'm not sure. But for the purposes of this tutorial, this is me telling you that those
Yeah,
exist.
okay. That's cool. Thank you.
So now that we've converted this from a mouse event to a keyboard event, we've set it to key up. Let's try it. And success. That has caused the green box and the yellow text. And so, there are the mouse events, there are the keyboard events, but some events are just events. And so on some pages, I know it works with this one, instead of specifying keyboard event or mouse event, you can just specify event. And it'll work with keyboard event names, it'll work with mouse event names, and presumably it'll work with other event names, although I haven't tried that. So if you're having trouble with specifying keyboard event and it's not working, you are more than welcome to try just a generic event, or like I said, look up on the Mozilla docs different event types that are available.
Was this the one where we had a side conversation about you thought maybe the focus, or was that the other site? Changing the focus might trigger it?
Yeah, so this change event normally fires when you've typed something into a box and then you defocus it. So one of the other things that Joe and I tried, and I'm not going to demo it here because it just really doesn't work, is using the focus function on the element to focus it, and then using the focus function on a different element. And by all means, when you do that manually, it works great. But there's just something about code that needs you to specify with dispatch event.
But where I was going with that was, I saw here that change is an event. Did you try, sending a change event instead of?
Well, let's try now.
Nope.
No, it works great.
Oh, okay. Because that's what you said it earlier. You're like, it changes the focus. So I'm like, oh, maybe that's what we could have sent, because that's actually changing. It's an event triggering the change of focus. Anyway,
yeah.
Thank you.
In normal browsing, this would fire when you changed focus away from it, and the content is now different. But yeah, there's a whole heap of events that can happen.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to look in this event listener and see what events your element is responding to. This could just as easily have been key press instead of key up. It could have been mouse press instead of mouse up. Change could have not been there. Change could have been the only one there. So it's really page dependent which events are going to work for you. And even then, not all input boxes respond to events. We've got this other regex testing website here, and let's grab this text. And you can see as I type in this regular expression tester, it does the same kind of thing, where as you type, it updates the page dynamically. But when you look in the code, you inspect element, there's not even an input element in here to target. So what do you do? I know from previous experience that CodeMirror is it's kind of a plugin that a lot of developers use for, let's search for CodeMirror, not plugin there. They use it to make text editors in JavaScript that have just text highlighting. So it's used a lot for code. You can see here, this dot is highlighted blue, and that's done through the CodeMirror plugin. And so when you're working with something like CodeMirror or as I showed in one of our other examples, the paste bin, you need to learn to speak the same language as that plugin. So for my paste bin, you would want to look up documentation for ACE. You know, how do I set the text of an ACE box? But we're working on CodeMirror now, so let's take a browse through their manual here. Let's see what commands we have available. We want to change the text in the box. We do a search for text. Mark text. Let's try set text. That is the command we were using earlier, isn't it, Joe?
I don't remember.
Programming API. Here it is, set value. So yeah, so many different terms for the same action. You really got to keep an eye out. Set value is the CodeMirror way, but what's this doc? I know from a little bit of prior experience with things like CodeMirror, like ACE, this doc is going to be an object that kind of conceptually represents the text box. It's not any one of these elements. It's more abstract than that. But you can get this, if we look, get CodeMirror from page element. Stack Overflow is very helpful. It tells you that you can get CodeMirror. Here it says editor. That's the same as the doc here. Editor equals query selector defined your element dot capital C capital M CodeMirror. And if we try that, you'll see it does return a value. Yeah, it does return a value, but what is it actually returning? Let's drop that dot CodeMirror off the end. And excuse me, you can find here that it is giving at least what looks like the right HTML from that CodeMirror. So that's probably our element there. And let's try that set value. You'll see Chrome auto-completes it. And if we set that value, you'll see the text just changed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were looking up here in the corner, you probably saw that it changed to processing and then found no match. And that's just because hello's not in that text. But if I change it to the dot like we did on the other page, you'll see that it updates everything like it should. It's working great. So if we take that code now that we've prototyped it in Chrome, excuse me, and we replace our dot value code, we replace our dispatch event, we can just as easily, put this away, just as easily do it from AutoHotkey as we did in the Chrome developer tools. And like in the dot value equals examples, something we've mentioned before is if you actually want this to be a variable that you're setting it to, like an AutoHotkey variable,
Yep.
if you set some variable and then drop it in here in your JavaScript, that will look like it works at first. But then if your variable has any of these quotes in it or a couple of other special characters, it will cause an error. In Chrome.AHK, and really it'll cause an error in JavaScript too if you tried the same thing here. Because what it's really doing is it's just taking this and putting it there, and you can see the highlighting.
Right.
The text ends at this quote, and then you have an L, who knows what that means, and then it tries to start another string with the single quote, and you'll see missing close parenthesis after argument list. That's the same error that it pops up here. And so the way to fix that, as we showed in the other tutorial, is you'll want to somehow maybe make a new variable, run chrome.jxon_dump, and you'll give it this text that has the characters in it. And if we look at what that outputs, let's comment that out when we're not focused on it. But you'll see it's put a quote, it's put a backslash behind that quote, and it's put a double quote here at the end. I zoom this in if I
know, yeah. It's okay. I think people understand it's escaping the characters.
Yeah, it's taking that text and it's applying all of the escaping that you need in JavaScript to go from text to something you would put in a function call. And so let's take our newly escaped variable, and we'll actually drop the quotes from here because now they're in our variable. And we can run that again, and you can see the page updates immediately. And if we go back to something like a dot, you can see it still works with dynamic updates too.
Right.
So CodeMirror is just one of those plugins you may encounter when you're looking at the page.
And to reemphasize, this edit field is a very specific, it's not your typical edit field in a regular form. So maybe the other approach works on a lot of the other edit forms.
Oh, for sure. One way to tell that you'll need to use an alternate interface like this one, .CodeMirror, is when you go to inspect the elements, if you don't get just immediate like an input or some other maybe a text area, that's a good hint that they're using a custom library like CodeMirror.
While you're right where you are, what would it look like if it was an edit? Would it say edit? Like, what does it say for a normal one?
If we go back to our hi-fi, inspect that, it says input type equals text.
Thank you.
There are other types like number or telephone, email, but it's this input tag that's the standard HTML tag for that kind of box.
Right.
So if you inspect and you don't find one of those,
yeah,
then that's a good hint that you're going to need to get a bit further up the elbow, so to speak, into the code.
And then, because you mentioned here, but I don't think we really pointed out, you can see CodeMirror littered throughout the screen right now, right? So that's one clue. But then also, when you and I were working earlier, you showed me up above, I think it was on this one, where the source link, where we could see it was basically being included by a script command, correct?
Yeah, my paste bin, if you inspect it, let's say you do an inspect element on this text box here, you'll see you don't get an input, you get a div.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see all over it says ACE content, ACE scroller, ACE, ACE, ACE. And if you look in the sources, let's go ahead and expand all of these. You can see ACE CSS. You can see from Cloudflare, it's pulling this JavaScript library, ace.js.
Yep.
And so by looking at these classes and by looking at sources, sometimes you'll see regex 101 doesn't have a big code mirror JavaScript. This is it. Well, I guess there's a little bit here. But it's not always obvious from one or the other what's being used, but usually you can find in one or the other. But CodeMirror and ACE aren't the only options. If we look at, here's a Wikipedia. There's ACE, there's CodeMirror, there's CodeJar, Code Anywhere, Monaco Editor, and these are just for the ones designed for doing code.
Right.
Some websites, they'll have custom drop-down boxes. They'll have custom everything. And so trying to find what libraries are they using and then look at the documentation for how to use those libraries can sometimes be more effective than trying to interact with the page directly.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. When I first, I think I told you this the other day, when I was first learning how to do any sort of object-oriented stuff, I started with web scraping, and it was, it was really tough. And then later I started using like Excel, and it was so easy because Excel is Excel is Excel. And once you figure it out, it's, it doesn't change my version of Excel to your version very rarely, right? But web pages everyone builds them differently, and it's like, man, it's so much more difficult because of that. Everyone uses different tools and builds them differently, and there's so many ways to do it. Awesome.
Yeah, I think we've covered everything we've prepared on this topic.
Yeah, thank you so much for walking through that. That was a really good learning experience, and I learned actually a lot more there again of the just the other day when I watched it again. I still didn't quite get it, of the understanding, looking for those other libraries that are also being driving that web page and how to track that down. So this was really helpful. All right, man. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been great.
Cheers.
See you, Joe.